9 times. One of the reasons why we feel that it has not been used more is the lack of education. Before the ConCon occurs, it is incumbent that the citizens of the state be educated on process and possibilities of such a convention. Thus, this evening's meeting. It is our hope that you will have a better understanding of the process and the ability to determine what is being asked by this convention. Although little is heard about the question of a vote for convening on November 7th, 2017 for the ConCon, many articles have been written. They can be found on the internet. This evening, however, I, like you, are here to take advantage of the opportunity not only to hear Professor Emeritus Peter Gailey and the Honorable Brian Cole, but also to ask questions about the ConCon's process and possibilities. Enjoy your evening.
Thanks, Becky. Good evening. I'm Mary Hugh Callan, co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metro area. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We influence public policy through research and advocacy, and we focus significant effort on registering and educating voters. By the way, the League of Women Voters is not limited to women. Men are most welcome to join us in making democracy work. On behalf of all the members of the Rochester League and the Interfaith Alliance of Rochester, I'd like to welcome you to our October Forum, for which we have assembled a stellar panel to help us examine the nuts, bolts, and monkey wrenches of a New York State Constitutional Convention. Peter Gailey is Emeritus Professor of Political Science, Canisius College in Buffalo. He's an authority on the New York State Constitution and the author of several books and articles on the New York State Constitution and its government. Along with Christopher Bobst and Gerald Benjamin, he is editor and contributor to a collection of essays titled New York's Broken Constitution, The Governance Crisis and the Path to Renewed Greatness, to be published in 2016. Brian Cole has served in the New York State Assembly since 2000 and as minority leader since 2009. His district includes all of Ontario County and parts of Seneca County. Reforming state government is one of Leader Cole's legislative priorities. He was on the leadership team of NewYorkConstitution.org, a New York State not-for-profit which sought to present a diversity of views on a range of constitutional issues facing New York. By the way, I urge you to visit www.newyorkconstitution.org. It's a very interesting and informative site. Neil Jasek has been active in several good government efforts over the years, including his work with the Interfaith Alliance of Rochester and the League of Women Voters, and the now defunct Citizens for a Better New York. He also served on the Brighton School Board from 1978 through 1987, including 2 terms as president of that board. The League and the Interfaith Alliance are proud to present this panel discussion, and we are especially pleased to be able to offer a question and answer segment following the presentations. We request, as always, that all our guests respect our panel, our hosts, and the League's commitment to civil and respectful discourse. Please join me now in welcoming our moderator, Neil Jasek.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Becky, and thank all of you for coming out on this night to learn a little bit about the New York State Constitution and how we might want to change it. We always kid ourselves in New York State, not so much kid in a laughing way, but the fact that our government seems to be often very, very dysfunctional. And one of the basic documents that governs how we govern, and that might be one of the both the reason and part of the solution, is our state constitution. It's a topic that not everyone gets involved in. But luckily, every 20 years we are given the opportunity to vote on the question of whether we would like to hold a Constitution Convention or not. And as you've heard already, you will have that opportunity in November of 2017. The website that Mary and Becky both referred to, newyorkconstitution.org, and that is not New York spelled out, but nyconstitution.org, contains a whole variety of topics and articles about elements of the Constitution which have a great deal to do with how well we can conduct our business in New York State. It covers the state legislature, it covers executive powers, it covers what state and local governments can do, it governs how our elections are held, the judiciary, the civil service, and many rights and other obligations of the state, such as the Adirondack Park, housing protections, pension protections, labor protections, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a rather critical document. We will have 3 parts to our presentation this evening. Peter Galley will lead off with some basic information about the Constitution and its conventions. Then we will hear from Assemblyman Cole, who, as a state legislator and leader of the minority, has to work under this Constitution, and he will provide us with his views of how it either gets in his way or helps what he does. And then Peter will conclude with a longer conversation on some of the details of what would happen if indeed there is a positive vote in 2017 and we actually had a constitutional convention take place. So to start the proceedings, I'll turn this over to Peter to provide some basic information to start with.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Mary, Becky, and Judy for providing me the opportunity to be here with you tonight to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, the New York Constitution. This forum is part of a 2-year campaign of civic education of the highest order, having as its object the informed participation of the citizenry in constitution making. Now, a number of organizations have recognized the importance of an informed, you might kind of flip that, because thank you. Do that in my second part. A number of organizations have recognized the importance of an informed vote in 2017 and have taken steps to provide that information. Under the coordinating hand of Robert Bullock of the Rockefeller Institute, a loose consortium of organizations and groups have come together to help provide that civic education. It includes, among others, not surprising, the state and local leagues of women voters, the Government Law Center at the Albany Law School, the New York State Bar Association, the Siena Research Institute of Western New York, and a number of press agencies, among others. This group has as its goal to attempt to raise the information level among the citizens of New York about the vote that's going to take place in 2017. That vote will be on this proposition that will appear on the ballot in that general election. Shall there be a convention to revise the Constitution and amend the same? The New York Constitution requires that every 20 years that question be put to the voters of the state. That 20-year period comes in November of 2017. To understand the significance of that fact, think about that for a moment. Suppose that question were to be answered nationwide. Shall there be a convention to revise and amend the Constitution of the United States? Should the voters in New York say yes, their direct role in the process is not done. The following year, 2018, they will be asked to select delegates to that convention. But there's more. When the convention's work is complete, that work must be submitted to the voters at a general election for their approval, most likely in 2019. Compared to the national amending process, where the citizens play no direct role, citizens in New York play a direct participatory and majoritarian role in calling, selecting delegates, and approving any changes to the state's constitution. This is but one of a number of important differences between the national constitution and the state constitution. That remarkable provision and the role it gives New Yorkers, however, must be juxtaposed with the following. Most New Yorkers do not know that they have a state constitution. 99% have not read it. And most revealing, in July of this year, a Siena research poll on the public's knowledge about the mandatory vote scheduled for November 2017 on whether to call a constitutional convention, only 6% of New Yorkers said they had heard or read a great deal, or even some, about the 2017 vote. 75% said they had heard nothing about it all. That's the challenge for those of us who want to inform the voters. We have much work to be done. New York has a proud constitutional tradition. Its first constitution, adopted in 1777, predated the approval of the Articles of Confederation. Indeed, the first fruits of the American Revolution were the state constitutions, adopted between 1776 and 1786. The country cultivated a tradition of written charters that were the end product of a tradition of common enterprise, bound by values and interests that we share. Notwithstanding this intertwined enterprise, there are significant differences between the two traditions. We point to the national Constitution with pride and admiration. Read, studied, celebrated, it has inspired generations, becoming in the process something of a sacred document. The rotunda of the National Archive buildings, I'm sure some of you have visited it, preserves the document. It's a shrine in every respect. The case preserving the document is a massive, bronze-framed, bulletproof, moisture-controlled, vacuum-sealed glass container. Seated in the rotunda by day, it is lowered into a multi-ton, bomb-proofed vault by night. Do we point to the New York Constitution with similar pride and affection? Is it read and studied and celebrated? Sounds like a preacher. Amen. No, brother. Has it inspired generations of New Yorkers? Where is its shrine? Those questions about the state constitution seem awkward, even out of place. Why? For one, we are not in the habit of asking such questions about our state constitution. But the shorter answer to the four questions posed is that we have not treated our state constitution very well. We have not given it the care that a founding document deserves. One manifestation of that lack of care is that we have placed in the document, and more to the point, what we have allowed to remain in that document. By these measures, our Constitution falls quite short. It is a document neither known nor read by the general public, or most public servants, for that matter. A document subject to neglect and ridicule. A document filled with impenetrable prose, anachronisms, oddities, redundancies. A document encrusted with amendments that have undermined the initial coherence of the document. By trivializing its content, these provisions have done more to discourage reading. They have detracted from the Constitution's character as a fundamental document, and they have bred disrespect and, in many quarters, even ridicule. I can remember as a student taking state and local government courses. There was a chapter on the constitutions of the states, and the professors loved to point out the idiocies and the silly things that appeared in these state constitutions. Not much has changed over the past 50 years. Case in point, in 2000, Lance Eggleston was appointed to Hamburg's Environmental Commission, Hamburg, New York. As required, he had to go to Village Hall to sign the bound book containing the oath swearing to support the United States and New York constitutions. Like 99% of us, he had not read the Constitution. And he wanted to know, my word, what he would be swearing to uphold. He did not want to sign a blank check. He asked the village clerk for a copy of the state constitution. Well, nobody could come up with one. It was quite a scurry. Where are we going to find it? We asked everybody in the office. Why can't local governments have a copy of the state constitution? If we are interested in reforming this New York Constitution, the single most effective thing we could do would be to have every public official in this state, every teacher, every member of the civic organizations of this state, the attentive public, I call them, read the document. It would be like taking castor oil, taken only in small doses, but it would be consciousness raising of the first order. The reaction that we have, I forgot to turn this damn thing off. The reaction would be something like this. If you've ever read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, The Stages of Death and Dying, and he went through these stages. Well, here's something like it would be. A revelation, surprise, bemusement, embarrassment, and anger. Who wrote this? What's this doing in the Constitution? What could that possibly mean? If dignitaries from other countries came to the United States to learn about our state constitutional tradition, would we show them our state constitution? And if we did, how would they react? That's how we need to see, or context, the vote we are going to take in 2017. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And now we will turn to someone who has to work under the Constitution, Assemblyman Brian Cole.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's good that the audience is awake. We got an interesting, couple interesting points to share with you. The last Constitutional Convention was held in 1967. Color television was in its infancy. There was no cable, no satellite TV. Personal computers had not been invented, nor the internet. There were no electronic calculators, cell phones, PDAs, iPods, fax machines, CDs. And that's just a short list. A lot has changed since the last Constitutional Convention. About, let's see now, it was about 6 years ago is when I started traveling the state. In fact, I was here, or not in this particular building, but was part of a program in Rochester back in April of 2010, having the exact type of forum that we're having this evening. And over the course of time when I first began the quest was a series of forums all across New York State, every single region, including New York City, Long Island, everywhere. And I always started off the forum with this question, so we're going to try this tonight to see what sort of reaction we get. Can I get a show of hands to answer this question? Is New York State working for you? If it's yes, raise your hand.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, keep your hands up for a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Less than half. Now, I can tell you that that's an improvement because back in 2010, and I'm not making this up, there was only one person that put their hand up back in 2010. So I guess we've made progress, which is a good thing. But I always find it fascinating that the people's attitudes about these sort of things are based on their lives at the moment, what's going on at the moment. The last couple of years, actually 4 straight years, we've had on-time budgets. Well, prior to those 4 years, we hadn't. There has been a shift in state government that I think fairly said has been an improvement over the last 6 years in different ways. Not, you don't agree with everything, but obviously, but certainly there's been some improvements because I think that affects people's thought. The interesting thing I would share with you though is that if you can well imagine in the business I'm in, is we do a lot of polling. And when you ask this question, overwhelmingly you get a different answer from some of the show of hands I had tonight. The question is, do you think New York State's on the right track or the wrong track? Now there are people that think it's on the right track, but they are in the minority, overwhelmingly throughout the state. So what that means is over 55% of the people that have been surveyed on these polls think that New York State's on the wrong track. Now I will also tell you, these are scientific polls. They're not anecdotal. You have to be a registered voter, and typically the polling that is done is that person has voted at least once, if not twice, in the last couple of election cycles, both at the presidential level and also the gubernatorial level. So these are registered voters. These are people that actually vote. We won't get into tonight, at least right now, the number of people that don't vote, and that's a whole other question by itself. I got involved with this idea with Bill Samuels, who is a gentleman that actually is from Canandaigua, where I live. His family was long-time residents of upstate New York, and Bill now lives down in New York City. But I got together with Bill and a professor by the name of Jerry Benjamin, who's a professor from SUNY New Paltz. These folks really care. And by the way, this is what I would say is opposites working together, because I'm a Republican, if you haven't figured that out. Bill Samuels is a Democrat, and we're not sure what Jerry is, but we know he votes. But we have a common ground, which is to make New York State a better place to live, work, raise a family, and hopefully retire in this state, regardless of where you live. However, there are a number of issues from a legislative perspective. Now, I'm in the minority, so that's in the spirit of full disclosure in the state assembly. But I can tell you, I've been in the assembly for 15 years. My background before I got in the assembly is I'm a business guy. I own my own business. I've worked from startup efforts to multi-billion-dollar international companies. I've traveled internationally. And that's really the crux of my background before I got involved in the state legislature. I've served in local government. I've served on school boards. I've served and helped out a variety of different not-for-profits. And the only reason I share that with you is just to kind of illustrate that I have a different background that I bring to the state legislature. What I also found, which would drive me absolutely crazy, is I really saw that New York State could be better than what it is. And I'm not talking about Democrat-Republican stuff. I'm really just talking about better public policy, reducing the cost of living in New York State, having a government that is more responsive to the needs of its residents and businesses. So obviously, based on research, we thought, how can we change those things that we'd like to change in state government? How can we do that? Well, we do have legislation that's introduced every year, literally thousands of pieces of legislation in both houses of the legislature. And unfortunately, there are a lot of good ideas in those pieces of legislation, but they stop because of the two majorities that control both houses, and we can say this with some confidence, it's both parties, have really total control of state government in addition to Governor Cuomo, or any governor for that matter, not just Governor Cuomo. And what that has done over the years is stifle the role of an individual legislator, even to get a bill voted up and down on its own merits. If you bring it out and you lose, okay, you didn't get enough votes, we can live with that. But it's been so top-down driven by the legislative leaders that have been elected, it has not been what I call good state government. And there's a variety of topics that people have introduced legislation about that could fix things in New York, but they don't go any place. So when we start talking about what's a great idea to maybe get some new ideas or change the state government that the legislature is not willing to do, and that's where we got, well, the Constitutional Convention. And so that's why I've been very actively involved to try to spread the word, and it's been, you know, a 7-year process, a couple more years to go for sure. We'll probably talk about more when Peter comes back up of some of the obstacles. And certainly some of the obstacles, the greatest one is anybody that wants to keep the status quo would be against us having a constitutional convention in 1997, or actually it would be held the year after the vote. And as has been mentioned before, back in 1997, there was a tremendous amount of special interest money spent to discourage people from supporting a constitutional convention. And when you're spending that much time, effort, and money, that's all about somebody's benefiting by things not changing. And when you're looking at, we didn't have the convention, I think someone just said 67. We did not have a convention in 97 because it got defeated at the polls, which is why we're back at it again in 2017. So there are a variety of topics that have jumped out for me. It's dealing with redistricting, term limits, our debt, to name a few. I don't look at this as a personal agenda, I don't. I just look at it as an opportunity for us to have more of an opportunity to change where we need change in state government. This is our state constitution. 45 pages. 45 pages. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a constitution. I just think that we should have something that we could read and understand and it actually works. And I'll just give you one example before I finish my remarks, because we'll be available for questions once Peter's finished. Is that, has anybody heard of the message of necessity? Kind of, sort of? Okay. Well, what that is that with our current Constitution, a legislative bill, when it's been introduced, has to lay on the desk, literally, lay on the desk for 3 days before you take action. A message of necessity is where the governor, it doesn't matter who the governor is, basically says, well, I think we've got an emergency here and we need to take action, and so it basically waives the 3-day time period. Well, I can tell you in the time that I've been in the state legislature, the message of necessity has been abused. Why? Because they want to cram legislation through the legislature and have the governor sign it so that the public does not have an opportunity to really weigh in. And these are things that are done very quickly, overnight, without public input, and regardless how you may feel about a particular issue, my focus is, unless it's a dire emergency, our state, even back in 9/11, if we had to have an emergency and meet for special funding or special homeland security things, that's an emergency. We need to move. But certainly, or some other real crisis, but to use a message on what I'll call routine legislation, because you don't want to get the public backlash. And could be both sides of an issue. Those in for it, those against it. And that really is a prime example of, it's allowed by our Constitution, but it's abused to avoid transparency and public input on controversial issues. You'll never see a message of necessity used on what I'll call routine pieces of legislation. So there's little things like that that really permeate all that we do in Albany. And the last thing I want to say is, why I have so much fervor about this, is that all those ideas that I told you about that rank and file legislators have introduced, both sides of the aisle, both houses, that don't go anywhere, the Constitutional Convention is an opportunity to change that. So we can actually have a democracy and have debates and have discussions And then you have to go work and talk to your fellow legislators and say, well, will you support this bill? And then the other legislators say, well, yeah, but I'd like you to support mine. That's democracy. That's the way our founders had envisioned us, is, you know, working through the mud, certainly nothing overnight, very deliberate body, but something where you're actually talking and listening from all sorts of walks of life, all sorts of different pieces of geography in New York State, because we, as you know, we have a very diverse state. So the ConCon, to me, is an opportunity to bring more democracy, small d, to state government, and to have issues heard or potentially voted upon by the public, by all of you, by all of us, that may have a positive change. I could actually go on, but I won't. I'm trying to capsulize some of the issues that have really, that I've seen in my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for making some very important points. And so the question comes to many of us is, all right, suppose the message does get across and we vote positively in 2017 to have a convention. What happens next? Who's going to do the redrafting and what are they going to deal with? So to help us get into some of those issues, I'll turn the mic back to Peter.
Thank you, Nathan. Would you put that folder that has the list of the process to the road of 2017 so they get an idea? You have a sheet, by the way, that I think the league did that's very helpful. It's somewhat duplicative, but I just wanted to go over what I did so it will be helpful. You can dovetail it with what the league has done. Yes, here's the process, and fairly straightforward. It's the road. That's the question. I've mentioned it in my first remarks. It will be put on the ballot in November of 2017. If the voters answer yes, the legislature passes enabling legislation. That is, this is legislation to establish the rules by which delegates will be selected. This is a very important step. They could put the standard rules for getting elected in place, or they could have nonpartisan elections, or they could require that there be a different form of voting for these individuals. A great deal of changes could be made by the legislature that would determine the way in which these delegates are selected. So it's a very important piece of legislation, the enabling legislation. And these delegates then will be selected at the general election in 2018, November. The next step, at some point in this process, there will be legislative or executive action setting up preparatory commissions. These are the commissions that would sit down, gather all the information, lay out the major issues of problems with the Constitution, provide some alternatives, some background